Welcome to my channel where I try to reduce or spread ideas on how to reduce the suffering of life. Now, last night when I was going to bed, I finally figured out the key argumentation for why I want to reduce suffering. And it's as follows. But if you'd like to learn more about how to reduce suffering, then like this video and subscribe to my channel. Okay, so in life, we are faced with the issue that we regularly suffer. It's like an inherent part of our life. I mean, in Buddhism, the entire religion is predicated on the first noble truth, which states all life involves suffering. Okay, life, I wouldn't say is always suffering, but like an enormous part of it is suffering. Now, that's a problem if you don't actually have a reason to be suffering. Because if you're just suffering, you contemplate life and you start to think, this seems like a shitty joke. Like, who came up with this stupid idea of life where you just suffer? It's kind of, like, it's a stupid idea. And you didn't choose to be born in this world, but you're still faced with the challenges of life. And if you continue on this train of thought, I think it's easy to conclude that you potentially dislike your own existence. You actually hate your life. And then when you reach that point, you don't really care about anything anymore because you don't value anything more, because nothing is valuable, because all life is irritates you, let's say. And then you adopt suboptimal behavior, which is self-destructive and also damaging towards the people around you. And if every individual does this on a societal aggregate level, the entire society, I think, shifts or it downwards, it declines. Hence, that is of high priority to fix the suffering. Now, how do you fix it? I would say there is the key distinction, or the key sort of dynamic here, is that you need to find a justification for the suffering, a reason to suffer. And I would call that meaning. Or some would maybe call it fulfillment, but let's just call it meaning. And meaning is something that makes life worth suffering for. It's something you'd say like, okay, I'm suffering, but it's worth protecting my family. It's worth helping humanity. Like, I voluntarily will continue to suffer, but for this reason, and this reason justifies it. So you have meaning here, and you have suffering underneath. So like, suffering is the foundation, and then you have the meaning on top, which justifies it. Now, it only justifies the suffering if it is larger than the suffering. That's the key thing, because the suffering is heavy. It's big, it's large, and it's in your face. So the meaning needs to be seriously powerful to outweigh the suffering. Now, I'm just looking at my notes because I drew this out when I was going to bed last night. I got up about, like, I think twice I got up to jot this down because I was having these, I suddenly figured it out. So the meaning always needs to outweigh the suffering. And like, ideas of meaning, it's usually something like, it's a responsibility. It's like a duty you take upon yourself. You voluntarily take this duty to, let's say, for me, it's to reduce the suffering in people. And that's very meaningful for me. Or it's to save lives as being a doctor or a surgeon. Okay, now, right now in my life, I am more focusing on the reduction of suffering, because this ratio needs to fit. Like, the meaning needs to be larger than the suffering. So we have two variables here we can manipulate: meaning and suffering. And the thing is that meaning, I would consider, is it's more subjective than suffering. What gives you meaning is more subjective. Some people may think that, just feeding their family is the most meaningful thing. And some people may say, that's not meaningful enough. I actually need to go out and help humanity. So it's quite subjective. Hence, delivering a product which gives meaning to people is harder because it's not standardized. It's difficult to standardize a solution to a solution to help people find meaning. It's quite customized, I think. That's why I've decided to focus on the suffering aspect. It's easier to standardize techniques to reduce suffering, so you ensure that ratio. Like, you need to have the meaning there, but we can reduce the suffering. It can get bigger and it can get smaller, and that's more standardized, because I think it's more, I don't want to say it's objective, but it's less subjective than meaning, I think. So how would you reduce suffering? For example, I think it's relatively easy to generalize that if you eat healthy, you'll have a healthier body, and it'll calm your mind, or your mind will be more stable. Like, your emotional volatility will decrease to a degree, and that's good for that reduces your suffering, because you're less stressed, or you're less the frequency of you falling into negative downward mental spirals decreases that frequency by eating better, because your emotional stability goes up, for example. Or sleeping better, because sleeping, I'm pretty sure, also regulates your emotional stability. These are just like standardized products. You can teach how to eat better, or to sleep better. Then there's other things like habits, because then you're more productive and you produce more, which makes you more satisfied, because you're moving closer to your goals. Hence, you release positive emotions, I think there's positive emotions, yeah. Stuff like that. And that's quite standardized amongst people. You teach them how to build up a habit, but then they can build up their own habit. And that's a lot easier than trying to find a customized customized solution to people's meaning in life. Hence, suffering is better, because it's less subjective. And that's what I want to do with this channel. I want to teach, or maybe spread some sort of wisdom that might be useful, I'm not sure, to people, and hence be able to reduce their suffering. And that's also, I think, what I want to set out and do in the future in my life. Help people reduce their suffering, because that's a variable I can easily influence, and maybe I'll take on one day the variable of meaning. I think I already do that to a degree in my workshops that I give, for example. Yeah. So that was my explanation of why reducing suffering is so important, because it stops you from perpetuating your own suffering and adopting destructive behavior, which, yeah. And the thing is here, why is suffering a focus point here? Why is it important? Because, well, if you're suffering, it's terrible. It's like I would almost go to say it's like a truth that you want to move away from a state of suffering towards something else, something that's better. And because suffering is like universally, it's terrible, I would say. Yeah. And I've made another video on the difference between two types of suffering, like a suffering that's inherent in life, and then a suffering that is unnecessary. And the inherency is sort of tragedy, one could say, and the other section is unnecessary suffering, which can be reduced. And that's my focus point, what I want to look into. Yeah. So thank you for listening to this video. I hope it helped. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more on how to reduce suffering in life. Thank you for listening.